Oh, this is wonderful. Cornerstone is still there. Yeah, it's the date in Hebrew. I have a lot of very warm, fond memories of the Emmanuel Cohen Center. This building was kind of a haven for me during my, grade school years and even my junior high years.
For the past few decades, Pillsbury United Community's Oak Park Center has served a neighborhood largely made up of blacks and other people of color. Generations before, it was the Emmanuel Cohen Center, which met the human service needs of a booming Jewish community. The foundation for the Cohen Center was laid in the 1880s when a religious school, which would later become the Talmud Torah, was founded to serve a growing North Side Jewish community.
Unlike many Jewish communities, synagogues didn't necessarily define the center of gravity for Jewish life on the North Side. And other institutions instead, particularly educational institutions, the Talmud Torah in particular, had central roles to play in the development of Jewish life.
After meeting in synagogues during its early years, the Talmud Torah moved into its own building on Bassett Place in 1910. Just a few years later, a new structure was built on Fremont Avenue that allowed the institution to expand its services.
That building provided a number of services within this one building. It wasn't just the afternoon Hebrew school.
Well, the Talmud Torah emerged in the 1930s, 1940s as a center for active, progressive Jewish life in Minneapolis. The faculty, their prominence in Jewish life in one way or another, in community life, its embrace of Hebrew as the Jewish language of the future, all of which propelled it to a central role in Jewish life in the community.
It spun off a community center really very similar to the traditional settlement houses that were established in the 19th century.
The settlement house idea was that it was of the neighborhood. The people who worked there lived at the house, and the idea was it was a place like going to your neighbors.
One of the reasons that Emmanuel Cohen was established in the early 1920s is Jewish leaders were very concerned about Jewish juvenile delinquency.
There were other settlement houses. There was Wells Settlement House that was founded by St. Mark's Episcopal Church. There was Unity House. There were other settlement houses in this neighborhood. And Jewish kids did belong to them. But there was not a community house that could service the particular needs not only of the Jewish kids, but of the African American kids.
What African Americans had as a cultural bookend to the Cohen Center was the Phyllis Wheatley Settlement House a few blocks east. The two movements had both begun one after the other in that old Bassett Place building. In its second building on Bassett Place, Phyllis Wheatley served the many needs of the neighborhood and would become the center of the Black Renaissance in Minnesota. African American women in leadership realized the serious challenges facing young women, youth, and families in North Minneapolis. They eventually garnered the support of the women of the city's milling families through the Women's Christian Association, and W. Gertrude Brown was hired as the first head resident of the settlement.
Phyllis Wheatley provided athletics, academics, babysitting, the arts. They were kind of the mecca of everything that children either weren't getting in the public schools or even didn't go to school.
Davis's father, the late Harry Davis Sr., was a prodigal son of the Phyllis Wheatley settlement.
Well, actually, I was born in April of 1923. And Phyllis Wheatley started exactly a year later in 1924.
Dad brought the name recognition up to another level because of the success they had in the boxing program.
Harry Davis's success as a boxer and coach, a professional, and political pioneer speaks volumes to the impact of the Phyllis Wheatley Settlement House and its staff.
Gertrude Brown, she was very active in politics and economics, primarily education. She designed Phyllis Wheatley. She designed the rooms for students and homeless people. She designed the nursery school and set up the meetings for all of the organizations in the area. Gertrude Brown designed that.
By his successes in civics and sports, they always identified Harry Davis with Phyllis Wheatley. So that kept Phyllis Wheatley in the limelight.
We sometimes forget when we talk about the Phyllis Wheatley House, and with Gertrude Brown's arrival here to take leadership thereof, that this was in 1924. And it's right at the beginning of the Harlem Renaissance. Ethel Ray Nance, again, who had connections also with the Phyllis Wheatley House, would go on to become a secretary for Charles S. Johnson and W.E.B. Du Bois later on.
In this photo of Nance at the Wheatley House, you can see a rendering of the slave poetess Phyllis Wheatley, the settlement's namesake, created by the Harlem Renaissance's most notable artist.
And one of the paintings that the Phyllis Wheatley holds is a painting by a young black visual artist named Aaron Douglas, who became the single most famous painter of the Harlem Renaissance. Local musicians, people like Percy Hughes, and members of Oscar Pettiford's family, for them the Phyllis Wheatley House was a central part of their development.
And this is Sarah Vaughn.
That's a nice picture too. Ira, all the best.
North Sider Ira Pettiford, along with his brother, well-known musician Oscar Pettiford, were notable names on the national jazz scene. Ira's widow, Jeanne Pettiford, recalls cooking for some of the biggest names in jazz at the Phyllis Wheatley House.
So on the north side, there was a Phyllis Wheatley, and that's how you got cooking for folks when they came to town, because they'd stay at the Wheatley and they'd want some good food, and you would prepare it.
I sure did. Father Hines, Duke Ellington, Billie Holiday. North Minneapolis just seemed like home.
Jeanne Pettiford, who is white, says that Ira and Oscar Pettiford are as much Native American as they are African American, a reminder of the diversity found on the North Side and at the Phyllis Wheatley Settlement.
It wasn't all African Americans. My first nursery school picture at Phyllis Wheatley, there were 7 Caucasians, 4 African Americans, and 1 Asian.
But in the de facto segregation of the Twin Cities, Wheatley was the cornerstone of Minnesota's black cultural and social life.
I took piano lessons there. I played basketball. We could go there and it was friendly. And so that's where our parents sent us, and that's where we had our best times.
My mother's from St. Paul. My father is from the North Side, and Phyllis Wheatley was his social network. And he used to court my mother along the streetcar along University Avenue to pick her up and bring her back. And so it was a safe place for young people to meet and to have a good time. And marriages happened, and I guess we're kind of missing that in the community right now.
Through the 50s and 60s, the settlements were changing. Funders were demanding mergers to remove duplication.
We were the lone black agency in that mix. We were not forced into the merger, but Wells Memorial and Unity merged.
The names of these organizations were evolving in a way that reflected change as well.
And as they merged, a lot of them started using words like neighborhood services or neighborhood centers or things like that, partly because nobody in the outside world understood what settlement meant anymore. So I'd get calls like, well, can I get my insurance claim taken care of?
Although it survived the settlement mergers, Phyllis Wheatley, a building that housed a great deal of Minnesota history, was in the path of the new Interstate 94.
And so building was sold to the highway department, and that left Phyllis Wheatley without a home.
But the sale of the building gave Wheatley the resources to buy into the construction of a new Park School Community Center complex in 1970. Today, a diverse population of Northsiders are served by Phyllis Wheatley House, 80-plus years after it began in that old building on Bassett Place, the same long-gone structure that produced the Emmanuel Cohen Center. For its part, the Cohen Center moved to St. Louis Park with a westward migrating Jewish community in 1963, where it was reestablished as the venerable Jewish Community Center.
Which is a very highly used building to this day.
For everybody. Black, Gentile, Jew.
And everybody is
everybody.
Welcome. Everybody is very welcome there.
Pillsbury United Communities got involved with this property in about 1980. So yeah, there's a lot of history in this particular room for me and for the community. So, you know, one of the great things about settlement houses, I think, is that they've changed all the time to try to figure out what they are. And I think that's a good thing.